maybe this is a whole 3-body problem that we're dealing with right now, where they're like, well, it's a race because they don't like that we're catching up. Why do they get to decide what disclosure is? Disclosure is a personal thing. We do have to question it, because those people who are telling us to believe them are also the same people who are trained to fool people.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this very special edition of Anomalous. I'm Digby Furno, and joining me as always is my hostess with the mostess, Tom Thompson.
Where'd you come up with that one? Oh my God.
I don't know.
How are you, man?
Well, it's because you've shaved your beard, you look quite feminine now, so I just called you.
Oh, come on. You couldn't. It was the de-aging formula that I was given from my contact at DARPA.
Yeah, absolutely. You look like a 12-year-old boy, mate.
I do look a lot different, but it's nice. That's my skin was getting a little dry, but whatever. It's not
looking
important.
Good, buddy. Looking
I appreciate
good.
it.
Right, let's move straight on. We've got an amazing guest on today. Tom and I always like doing this. We like doing the big UFO sort of whistleblowers and things like that, but we also like to speak to other podcasters, especially really great podcasters that we try and get some sort of inspiration from. And I don't think there's anybody that actually out there at the moment that inspires me more than our guest today. Tom has got a man crush on his sets, and I adore his editing style and his interview style. So without further ado, can we please welcome Mr. Chris Ramsay? Chris.
Hey.
What's up,
How you
man?
doing?
What's up? Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have
Pleasure
you on.
and an honor.
It is. It
So
is.
cool.
How are you doing today? You good?
Yeah, doing well. Trying to keep up with everything that's going on and get ahead, but it's really tough, as you guys know, to get ahead in this space because there's so much information every single day.
Yeah, there is. And actually, I would say the last couple of weeks, it's certainly for us, it's been a bit stagnant. Some news has come out today, which is kind of interesting, and we'll touch on that in a second. But yeah, I mean, when it's going really fast, it changes every day. Certainly, like a year ago, Tom and I were struggling to keep up with everything that was coming out. And we've had amazing whistleblowers come out, and it's amazing to me actually that the rest of the world isn't sort of sitting up and taking note of everything that's going on, because at the moment it just seems like there's so much evidence out there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the evidence has been around for a very long time, actually. But yeah.
Well, we're all agreed on that.
Yeah, 100%. Oh man. Yeah, but you know what? Maybe it's a good thing though. If you think about it, we were struggling to keep up, but now there's some new tools and tricks out there now, and when things have slowed down, you can kind of pace yourself and get back into it. But sometimes there's been like past couple weeks, I was like pulling from like the literature. I was like, I don't know what the hell to talk about. I don't know what to make a video about right now. And that's where I tell people, go back into the books that have been written, because there's so much out there for that.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I enjoy doing when I'm not podcasting with a guest, is looking back. I'm trying not to like follow up video wise on every single thing that comes out. Because I do enjoy that the content is evergreen and can sort of be watched whenever. But B, I think there's so much to catch people up on, and people who are getting into this space.
That's my mom.
Hi, Mom.
She does this on purpose. I swear to God, every time that I am recording, she opens the door and she tries to get me to like break character. I love her though.
Chris
She's the
doesn't have
greatest
to
person
put up
ever.
with this kind of shit.
It's so fun. No, she's so legitimately
No,
funny.
that's very sweet.
Great person. I love my mom.
So that's the gist of it. Just kind of trying to catch people up on what's been happening in the last 80 years plus.
Right.
And there's so many documents that are available thanks to thanks to all the FOIA requests being done by all sorts of individuals, that you could just go back and read these things and just rediscover a lot of the things that we've read or that we were familiar with, but with a new lens based on the information that's come to light nowadays.
That's so important.
Namely with the whistleblowers that you mentioned. And so rereading a lot of those documents, you do actually find a lot of new things out.
100%.
You know what I loved is you do these big interviews. You've had some of the biggest names on, and your interview style is impeccable. But in addition to that, it's the other videos you do, like the Lacerta files.
We paid the bills. Who's ready to get roasted by a lizard lady?
I absolutely loved watching those. You know, I would put them on at bedtime, put my earpods in, and while my wife was asleep, and I'd sit there and listen to them and watch them. And I just think that that's a great way of doing it, because you know you're not claiming that any of this stuff is real, but it's entertainment at the same time. You know, everybody, let's face it, everybody manages to get the same guests on. Your Stephen Greer's, you know, your whistleblowers, Jason Sands, God bless him, and, you know, all these names, they go round circuits, you know, and everybody asks the same questions. And I feel like you managed to look at things through a different lens. Your questions are great, and then when you haven't got those people on, you've got this entertainment side to it as well. And I think it's one of the things that really makes your channel pop and make it different from everybody else.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's an important thing. You know, I think the entertainment value of this space is heavily criticized among people in this space, but I don't think it should be, because I think entertainment can be a good avenue to get someone past that sort of ontological shock that they might be experiencing with just full-on data. And secondly, I think that, you know, information is one thing, but having it stick is another. And I think when something is neatly packaged or sort of just made in a way that's easier to absorb, then you know, you could throw all the information at somebody, but if it's not sticking, then really what is it good for? So really taking, I think I make up for the lack of perhaps knowledge that I have in this space, which I'm sure you both have a ton of, and I make up for with that sort of production value that what little knowledge I do have, or the investigations that I do go through, I can make those things stick through the editing process and through the entertainment value that I provide with the content. And I think that's really important.
It is really important. And you know what also helps, I think, and you've just touched on it yourself, is that, you know, you're learning a lot as you go, which is what I'm doing as well. Tom's been researching this far more than I have, for a lot longer period of time. But when you approach things with that lens, you're approaching it to a similar level to the people that are watching it. Therefore, you're not making assumptions about things that people should know when they don't. And I think that's a barrier that needs to be broken down more effectively to allow more people to come into this sort of sector and learn more, because, you know, the communities online can be quite harsh to people that are new. There's a lot of bickering and infighting, which turns a lot of people away. So when you have somebody that's approachable and doesn't come across with that arrogance of you should already know that, I think it makes you more accessible to a wider audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. I'm trying to think right now of this tweet that I saw, which is really funny, and it started off with like, you know, looking at the Chris Bledsoe situation, it really, you know, Diana Pasulka said this might be another Paul Benowitz, and then he just goes on to this, and then he goes, if you understood any of that, it probably means that you have no life.
Oh well.
You know? So I think, you know, I think there was a middle ground somewhere to be found, because we all understood what I was saying.
100%.
But, you know, throw that onto somebody who's new to the topic. What the hell are you saying?
You know,
there's none of this is coherent.
I think what you do, and I think what we strive to do between Digby and I, like what the three of us do, is kind of what I always imagined like To the Stars Academy was trying to do. I think that's the whole like everybody was complaining about the entertainment aspect of what DeLong was trying to do. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, like you said, it breaks through the ontological shock. If you present this information in an entertaining way, it helps people absorb it. You know, say what you want about Tom DeLonge, but I think he knows a lot about the subject. And I think that's what they were trying to do, honestly, is what we do, is to create something that people can sit down and find interesting, but then it's filled with information that they're going to take with them afterwards, and that, you know, they're going to let it saute in their brains and go, wow, I never thought of it like that before. Maybe that really is true. I think that's what they were trying to do. And I think that's what the three of us do. I really believe that.
Yeah, I agree to a certain extent. I think with that, the only problem is that, you know, you had so many spooky people involved in that whole process that, you know, I think most of us who have a little bit of a sensibility to this topic know better than to listen to anything if it gets to that level, right? We do have to question it, because those people who are telling us to believe them are also the same people who are, trained to fool people. So it's it's I agree that the entertainment value, sort of was early on established in that sense, and that was the key message. But then, you have all these other characters being involved where, it's getting just a little bit too dicey. And I think people smelt that. And I think that's just all that was. I don't
Yes.
think it's any more than that. I think they attempted to do something, but then realized that this can't work with this formula with these people, because people are just not buying it.
So, Chris, I'm intrigued. I mean, you've interviewed some great names, and some of the people. Let's face it. I mean, we've all interviewed people, and we're thinking, is what they're saying true? And you have to take everything with a grain of salt, especially when you're talking to people that, have been counterintelligence or whatever, or worked for the government in any capacity. Do you think you could pinpoint, and you don't need to specify a person, I'm not asking you to do that, but do you think that you've ever sat down and been and interviewed anybody and thought, this guy's completely lying to me?
Completely lying, no. But omitting truths, yes, absolutely. I think, when you watch that interview with Lou Elizondo, it's clear as day that he's not answering the questions directly. But
Wow.
But he's also been conditioned to do so almost in a political manner, which, to, I think, his own fault at a certain point, because he's genuinely a really nice guy, and really, I believe, wants to see, disclosure move forward. Now, in which way he chooses to do that might be up for debate, and people might, have their criticism about his, I guess his way of doing it, not so much his intention behind doing it. And so when it comes to that, he obviously, I mean, if you look at his testimony in front of the congressional hearing, which I was at, and he goes, he even says himself, he goes, I'm not allowed to answer that.
I would prefer to address that in a closed session, ma'am.
Who's telling you not to? Who is this person? Who's this entity saying you can't answer that? Right. And so there is that. There is a clear, it's not, I don't think he's hiding that. He's very open with the fact that he can't talk about certain things, as is Nick Pope. I just interviewed him. That'll be dropping this week. And, when asking Nick about the Calvine incident, that isn't declassified, right? So even I asked him on camera, I was like, what about the pilot who was there? And he goes, I can't talk about that. And I'm like, are we ever going to hear from him? And he goes, I can't say anything about that. And so I'm like, okay, well, you guys know that the pilot, like, they have information, obviously. For what reason they're holding it back, I have to assume is for our benefit somehow. Because otherwise it just feels like this elitist sort of invite only type thing, which I would, I don't know if I fully buy into that. I don't know if that's reason enough to hold things back just to be part of like the cool kids club. But so I have to otherwise assume that they at least believe it's in our personal interest to hold back these truths. That's where we're at now. That's debatable whether you were, maybe knowing the evidence, we might all change our minds. We look at, I often think like the people who want to know, right? We all want to know. We want everybody to know. But then it seems like the people who find out want no one else to know. And so you have to ask yourself, what is that? Why? What's so messed up about this information that they don't want anyone knowing about it, right? And I think that's what we're all trying to get to the bottom of.
What I find interesting is, as Tom and I have progressed and made friends behind the scenes with connections, and we speak to Jason Sands quite a lot, and Jason has given us a sort of into sort of the inner workings of what these people do in the background. Not specific information, but you generally start to get the feeling that the sort of key players in the disclosure narrative, as in your Luz and your David Grush, well, actually maybe not so much David Grush, but all these characters of this movie that is Disclosure
Mhm.
seem to have their own plan for what they want Disclosure to be, and they want people to play along with that. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or do you think that it's higher than that? Do you think somebody else is controlling them, or what's the plan
Mm.
in your opinion?
Yeah, it could be a mix of everything. I wouldn't exclude any hypothesis at this point. I think there's just so many variables at play, including ego. And I think that's one that's often overlooked. I think 80, maybe even more than 80% of everything you hear is due to someone wanting a spotlight.
Yeah.
And I know that's a broad generalization, but I think it is a big key factor. We are human. We are attracted to lights just like moths. And it seems to be a factor at the very least, right? So when you include this factor into the information, obviously then the information itself becomes slightly questionable, or the intentions become slightly questionable. And so you always have to apply that filter, and there's so many other filters that you have to apply, including some of these people used to be military, right? So they are soldiers. They are, they follow orders. Other people's might have personal agenda or maybe financial agendas. And so there are so many other variables when it comes to this stuff that you can't simply have a clear sort of idea of what's actually going on. And I do think that plays into it. I think that confusion is one of the greatest psyops, because if all of us can't agree and pinpoint on something, then everything's up in the air, right? And so if you look at the drone situation that was happening in New York and New Jersey, or New Jersey rather,
and in
and
the UK.
Yeah, in the UK, right? Absolutely,
Yep.
at
All right.
Betwater, Lake and Heath.
Yeah.
And so you have this, let's say you have these anomalous lights, but then also they start throwing up drones, and then there's recreational flight, then there's the weather people, and then there's so there's all these things up in the air, and you can't say for sure what anything is, right? You can't say for sure. And as long as you can't say for sure, then you don't have to have a plan of action. Right. And so this sort of suspension of everyone's ideas of what this is, I think plays to the advantage of whatever it is they're trying to accomplish, because in the meantime, in the interim, they can just keep it floating in the air and decide, where to go from there. They don't have to move down a specific path and tell you, oh, we're looking for nukes, or, oh, this is all, we're doing tests or whatever it is. They can say, yeah, we're still looking into it. And so as long as they can keep that up for as long as possible, I think that really acts as a veil to a lot of this cloak and dagger stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. I live in South Jersey, and I have my whole life, and I got the chance in the middle of all of that happening to talk to a lot of different people just face to face, because my day job, I deliver furniture, and I go into people's houses, and I can tell you right right from the horse's mouth, there were a lot of people that told me that they know what they saw were not drones. They're like, I know what a drone is. This was something that was shape shifting. That was one of the things that I honed in on, but I didn't talk about a lot publicly, because people can make the mistake of seeing something, and then when it's at a different angle, it can look like it's morphing. But I talked to too many people that were like, I watched this ball of light turn into a completely different object and go back. Like, it happened a lot of different times. So like the data that I just personally collected, just as like an investigator by myself, just like boots on the ground, I came to the conclusion that something weird was going on. And Digby and I developed a theory that something was happening, and they decided to kind of kill two birds with one stone. What they did is they threw up a bunch of these drones in the middle of something else happening, and then it just all looks like it's a mishmash and all part of one thing. And that kind of leads to my question for you, Chris, because I bring this up a lot. As much as there's all this confusion and the waters being as muddy as they are, sometimes I wonder, and I'm curious if this has crossed your mind. Sometimes I think to myself, is it really maybe just simple that they're like, okay, we can't hold this in any longer. The world's too connected, and they really are just kind of going through the motions of a process of releasing this, and that everything else in between is just sort of a side effect.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility, and I think that that's probably happening on some scale. But as you all know, the compartmentalization of this information is so vast that there's no, I mean, you have so many different intelligence agencies working on adjacent projects that they don't even know the others involved in, right? So, it's constant sort of, he said, she said, connecting dots. Jesse Michaels has a really good philosophy on how to tackle all of this, where he just kind of absorbs all the information, believes none of it, and then as the information comes in and he's absorbing it, he starts making connections to things that, he doesn't necessarily believe. But now more connections. Now we've got 7 or 8 connections, around this or around that. And it starts, a hypothesis can start to form. So it's good. I mean, it's just so strange because as we study anomalies, which this is a giant anomaly. It's a big, anomalous spike in this model. Because we study the anomaly, we have to be aware of all anomalies, and this subject is the most anomalous, and it attracts anomalies, right? So once you study one, it just opens the floodgates for so many, from Bigfoot to giant mantises to out of body stuff, and it just doesn't stop, right? So it's so difficult to this is it or that's it, which is why I think that's part of the reason I do enjoy what I do, because I get to just throw everything up in the air. Let's suspend disbelief for a second and let's just play these scenarios out to the fullest and just sort of hypothesize or philosophically, try to explain some of these things without using any definitive, mindset. So yeah, I just think there's a lot of fun in that, but also when people go the other way and they're like, no, this is that, that's where I start to become a skeptic myself.
Right.
So I like to remain open-minded until someone gives me like, no, it's the grays, right? Then I'm like, hold on. Is it though? Like, are they really gray? There's so many questions around what you're saying. Are they tall, short? Is it a biosuit? Is it just in my head? Are they physical? Like, there's all these other wildly weird scenarios that pop up around a single piece of information that there's no way that you could hone in on just one.
Dude, that was the greatest explanation ever. that's
A lot of
that's
people
it.
have to go, it has to be this or it has to be that. And no, so few people go, it's more than one thing. All of these things are impossible. Have you found instances that since you started investigating and getting heavier and deeper into this, that you have had experiences of your own? That's something that I've certainly gone through and we've gone through on this show. But I know you went to see Chris Bledsoe. You saw orbs for yourself. Would you say that you've had more sightings like that after that event, or anything else?
No, I would say, obviously since beginning my research into this stuff, you become more aware of it. And so therefore you're already contaminating the data by just having more data.
Yeah.
Right? You're making connections that other people wouldn't make. Where someone saw what I saw with Ryan Bledsoe over the ocean, which was these anomalous lights just appearing and leaving. We had someone run up on that beach, the same beach, who saw the same thing and said, "There's flares out there. Someone must be in trouble." Right?
Yeah.
So whereas I had a background in wanting to believe and a little bit biased towards the subject, this person, complete opposite, had a different perspective from objectively the same piece of information. And so I think being cognizant of that is very important when, trying to explain the things that I've seen. Now, that being said, there are some things that are more anomalous or more questionable that I've seen that I lack some type of prosaic explanation for. That being said, that doesn't mean that that's an alien or some type of ARV. I think, but definitely I notice more things. So I don't know if they've happened more or if I've noticed them more. It's like, we seem to see this ramping up of like sightings. Is that just because there's more media around the topic and therefore more people are looking up and therefore more people are filming things? Does it necessarily mean there's more anomalous activity, or just that we're recording more anomalous activity. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and more people looking up is a big thing. I think, and it's amazing what you can see when you actually just look up. In fact, there was an incident here in Portugal. When was it, Tom? About a month ago.
It was about a month ago.
I was phoning Tom video calling Tom while it was happening, and I was sitting. I run a community in Portugal. To give you a bit of background, it's me living here with my wife and kids, and there's some other families living here, and we're sort of building this sort of off-grid community. Great fun, but we're all sitting around a campfire, and I'm looking up at the stars, and I sort of set out an intention in my mind, going, I really want to see something, just sort of mentally, just sort of picturing it. And within 10 minutes, I see a light in the sky that's moving across the sky. And I turn to my son and go, Barnaby, look up there. It's a satellite. And then it changes direction. I was like, that's not a satellite. And then another one comes alongside it and starts moving off with it. And I was like, okay, that's 2. I saw 12 or 13 in 45 minutes. And they're all going different directions. And then I had another incident, which was about 3 months ago. I was being interviewed by Jason on UAP Studies podcast. Great podcast. If you don't watch it, please go and watch it. Link in the comments below. But I was being interviewed by him, and I was talking about an experience I had. I was asleep in bed, and I woke up, and there was this figure standing at the end of my bed. And I remember it's clear as day. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the evening, right? And as I was describing this ghostly-looking figure at the end of my bed, an eagle-eyed viewer who was watching the interview back saw something leave my forehead on camera. And there's this ghostly figure that literally on camera, we slowed it down. You can see it coming out of my forehead like this, and then it just goes up, and then it shoots off.
It is so weird.
It's so weird.
It's not dust.
No,
it's not.
It's very, very weird. But none of this stuff, I'd never been exposed to any of this stuff since before I started investigating it more. And Matt Ford from the Good Trouble Show, again, he's like, as soon as I started investigating, all these things started happening. And I do think that I think if you mentally let the phenomena into your life, then I think you will start seeing more. But you are right, though, when you say the more data you have, the more ability that you have to be corrupted by the data, because you're putting your own spin on it.
Yeah, and there's essentially 2 questions there. Is it one, is it happening more, and 2, is it actually anomalous, right? And like you'd mentioned, you looked up at the stars. You were sky watching. Would you have been sky watching were you not interested in the phenomenon, right? So that activity might have been going on all along. You just never took a second to really notice it, right? And so then the second question is that anomalous? And obviously by that description, to me, does sound like it is anomalous, and I would have a hard time explaining that as well. But I think this like I would love nothing more than to time travel back to before we launched anything up in space, and just skywatch. Because how easy would it be if you're in the 1500s to just stare at the sky and immediately know? Immediately. You don't need Avi Loeb's Galileo project. You don't need NASA and NRO. You don't need nothing, dude. You just need your eyeballs. And you just need to sit back and stare at the sky. And if anything is moving that isn't a meteor, then it's a UFO.
Yes.
Like, cut and dry. There's no if, and, or buts about it. There's nothing else it could be.
That's what's great about
There's
Beatrice.
No space debris.
I was just going to mention Beatrice because have you ever spoken to her before?
No, but I see the video she did with Jesse where she she takes these photos of these objects that were there that are
it's like some of the coolest evidence, and it's like you're talking about. Obviously not as far back, but it's prior to when we were launching things into space. And so I want to introduce this into the equation because like you said, there's a lot of angles to this, right? So sure. I struggle with the fact that I'm an experiencer. So it's like I know something's going on because I have seen it, and I was already interested in the subject from like birth. And the more you get into this subject, the more you realize that there might even be something to that. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So I struggle with the fact that there are still people that think that there's nothing like it's just all nonsense. And I actually now that StreamYard lets us do this, Digby, if you don't mind, I showed this to Dale when he had me on his podcast the other day. but I did the best I could with AI and such. And this is what I saw when I was 9 years old. It came, Chris,
Wow.
it came right over my head. I was in the Pine Barrens, and I could, like, it felt like I could have hit it with a rock. So it's like, this wasn't something I
Insane.
was seeing at a distance. It was right over me. So I have that embedded in me. So it's like, yes, there's a bias, but I look at my bias as like being legitimate, because it's like, I saw it. Now, whether this was man-made, I don't know, but I got a sensation when it happened that I'm getting goosebumps even talking about it. It something happened on a level that it's very hard to explain, that I felt it and was like, that's not human. And like, I knew it, you know what I mean? It's just, I don't know how else to explain that. And there's been other things that have happened to me, obviously, too, that I've spoken about. I had orbs out in front of me while I was driving one night that were like, it looked like a barbell, but like the middle section was like invisible. And it was just, I have, and I'm not someone who has any history of like schizophrenia or any type of mental illness that would create any visual or auditory hallucinations. I have nothing like that.
Reassuring.
I'm a very healthy person. I'm just saying, man, people bring
They
that
all
into the
say that.
equation. And I
That's
don't
what
know
all
how to
the
explain
cages
that.
say.
Listen, I totally believe you. And I am, that's the other thing is like, healthy skepticism is healthy. It's just that, it's healthy. I believe there is something going on, and I do believe experiencers, and I do believe that there are beings among us, and I do believe that there are UFOs, if not visiting Earth, have already been here in some shape or fashion. I believe we have the programs, back engineering this stuff. I believe all of that. Now, where I tend to like look at things more critically is when I have the evidence in front of me. Right? That's the only, because that's all I can do. Otherwise, I'm speculating. But when I have like a photo or a video, obviously I'm going to try to explain it away, because that's the only way I'm going to decide for myself if it's anomalous or not. Right? And like I said, you see something like that, like how could you not believe? Right?
It was right there, man. It's like I don't have a choice.
That's right. And the other important thing is like as a magician, I've spent half of my life doing magic and sleight of hand and like all this stuff. And so I know subterfuge, and I know how you can trick the brain using different psychological techniques. The thing is, even though you can explain something, because as a magician, I can explain everything. As a magician, I can tell you how the impossible is done, right? That's kind of my job. Whereas like as a consultant, like we would consult for magicians all around the world who had TV shows, right? In case you didn't know this, in case this is breaking news, if you see a magician on TV, he's got half a dozen of the world's finest magicians backstage working on the illusions with him. Like it's just like anything. If you make a movie about, spaceships, you're going to have, physicists working on it behind the scenes. It's not, the director's not coming up with this and the writer's not coming up with this, right? There's people who know this stuff. So we get together and we're faced with a problem, right? We're faced with what we call an effect. So someone would say, all right, I want to make this person levitate and then vanish, in front of, and I want it to be 360 degrees, and I want it to be daylight. And those are the parameters we're given, right? That's whatever that is. And so this piles on. Now we have to use all the methods that we have collectively to make this happen. And we can. Right? Because some of those methods are going to be camera angles. Some of them are going to be just illusions. Maybe they'll be maybe it's off camera. Maybe it's only psychological and it's done through suggestion in their minds. And so we have to come up with an explanation. We have to. There is no, that can't be done. It's magic. It's supposed to be impossible. That's what we do. So when I'm given things, I know that you can absolutely explain everything. Period, with a prosaic explanation. But that doesn't mean that explanation is what happened. And I think that's where a lot of people like Mick West and all these other, debunkers tend to have more of a narrow concept of what's happening. Just because you can explain something, that doesn't mean that that's the explanation. I can come up with 5 methods for the same magic trick.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
So that means there's 4 other ways that this could be done.
That's it.
right? And so you can't just explain something away because you have a method for it. That's, to me, a little ludicrous.
I
Yeah,
love
that's
that.
a really good point. That is a really good point. I'm intrigued. What was it that made you go from magic? Well, not leave magic behind, but what made you shift your focus a little bit over to the UFO phenomena and start Area 52?
Yeah, I was always interested in this stuff. Since a kid, 9 years old, I got to watch Fire in the Sky, which is I had an older brother, so probably not the best movie to let your 9-year-olds watch. But I watched this movie immediately. I was like, oh snap, aliens are real, because this adult told me so, that this is a true story, right? So I'm like, this is a reality I have to live in now. So for the rest of, this is prior to the internet. Obviously, you can't verify anything. So I was like, okay, that's just true now. So I was always interested in it, went down deep rabbit holes, the Phil Schneider stuff, the Bill Cooper, Bill Moore, all the, the whole gamut. And it wasn't, as a magician, I was pretty atheist, pretty skeptical, and I could explain everything. A lot of magicians suffer from the same affliction. They're ironically the most disillusioned people in the world. And so when they're given all this information on how things work and how you can explain everything, they too just become disenchanted. They don't believe anything, right? So most magicians you'll meet are atheists and non-believers, and they'll be big fans of James Randi and of the like. And as was I. And I was sort of indoctrinated into this, way of thinking. And then all of a sudden, I had a friend come up to me, Nelson Dallas, who's a memory champion, 6-time U.S. memory champion, phenomenal person. He's got a background in physics, very, very left-brained. And he comes up to me and he goes, yeah, I had, these guys show up in like a Facebook group and asked me if I wanted to make some money. They were going to teach me how to remote view for this hedge fund and start playing the stock market using remote viewing. And so they trained him for a month, an hour a day, to learn remote viewing so that he could make money for this hedge fund, right? Which I was like, hold on. Now, I'm like, clearly for me, psychic stuff was always explainable. It was always like, because I could explain how Uri Geller bends spoons. As a magician, I can do that. Not saying that's how he does it, but I'm saying I can do it. So I would always, in the back of my mind, be like, I don't really believe in this stuff. And then you put money to that. Now I'm like, wait, hold on. Well, you can't BS the stock market, right? So I was like, well, that's interesting. And I'd heard about these psychic spies back in the day or whatnot. So I asked him if he could teach me. And I spent a year learning how to remote view with him. Well, I spent maybe a few weeks learning how to remote view, and then did it for like a year and documented the whole journey. And, by the end of it, I had interviewed Joe McMoneagle and Ed Dames, Uri Geller, all Edwin May, all of the, heavy hitters. And we found that there was something going on.
Yes.
There's something going on. The things that we had were too close to, the actual thing to disregard. And I thought, if I put this on my magic channel, I'm going to get crucified. I spent most of a decade teaching people how things work, and now I'm like, oh, but the woo exists, right? And they're like, they're not gonna have it. I'm gonna get but I was also really passionate about this, and it was at a time where I was also kind of over what I was doing in how I was doing it and churning out content nonstop. And my heart wasn't into it. And I wanted to branch out into something a little bit more theatrical, cinematography, and, production wise, make something a little bit more extravagant. And so, yeah, I had this idea for Area 52. And I said, this is a great way to start it. I have all this footage backed up, this journey. Let me throw it down. And then, yeah, one thing led to another, and here we are, UFOs.
Wow, that's awesome. That's so cool.
I love the style. I love the style of your podcast. I think it's one of the slickest, if not the slickest, out there.
It's the slickest.
Thank you.
It is the slickest because I mean, it's so creative. You remind me. I don't want this to come off like being self-indulgent. You remind me of myself because there are so many things that I'm into that it's like I've been a musician for over 20 years. I'm very passionate about being a guitar player and making electronic music and such. I've been in a bunch of different bands, and I I always envision things very like enormous. I'm like, I want to make. It's like I like this song, but damn, that song would really be good for a theme song for this script, and that would look really cool. So it spreads out, and that's why I feel like I do what I do with Digby. Is like there's audio, there's video, there's storytelling, there's a lot of artistic value in it, and that's one of the reasons why I like admire what you do, because it's like you're what I want to be. It's like I'm the early proto version of where
All
you
right,
ended
Tom,
up, man.
stop kissing his
I'm just saying, man. It's just he's a talented guy, and my buddy Rob is a
I
card
appreciate that.
magician, and he doesn't know that we're having this conversation right now, and I'm just gonna send him a screenshot later. He's gonna pass out. He's been like seriously, he's like one of the biggest fans of yours, and I I wanted to ask you though too, being that you've made this shift now, and are doing things a little differently. How has your community received the fact that you were doing magic, like you were saying, but then you kind of dove into this rabbit hole of woo and craziness? Have people been like receptive of it, or have you had some people, kind of give you grief over it?
It's a good question. I think for the most part, I think fine, receptive. The other thing is that it's like, you know, as a creator, we like to think of them as like, oh, it's my audience. But in reality, they're sub to 100 other channels, right? And so, I don't create this illusion that like, oh, what do they think of me? Dude, there's so many other things they can watch. And the reality is that if I'm not posting, they're not aware of what I'm doing, right? So if I'm not there, it only when I post, and I've posted, like, I do these puzzles and stuff, and I post one, and then they're like, where have you been? Like, they had no idea I was gone, right? Because they're not getting the
That's right.
notification, but they're getting notifications elsewhere. So, it really is. I think for the most part, if it is something they're interested in, they follow along, and if it isn't, they've got other things to do, and I think that's fine. I totally think that's fine. I think it's everybody's prerogative to unsubscribe to absolutely anyone they just don't want to watch, and just move on with your day. You don't have to, what's the old saying? This isn't an airport. You don't have to check in before you take off, right? You can just leave. You don't have to comment. I'm leaving.
That's true. I love
And on
that.
that note, please subscribe to the channel.
That's right. Turn those notifications on.
And if you were looking for a good time to unsubscribe, there's the reverse call to action.
In fact, don't subscribe. We don't bother.
That's the third reverse Uno card of the day, Digby. We're now back where we started.
I'll be the podcast to get you the worst numbers. A lot of views, just like people diving off like crazy.
That's great. I haven't laughed like that in a while. It's been a long week. I needed this.
Well, we're already 42 minutes in. We've probably lost half the people by now. Anyway, this always happens.
That's true.
Look,
Keep
I
faith.
wanted to touch on this, just veering off slightly, and talk about some recent news, because Tom and I just saw this on X just before, literally 20 minutes before we started to interview you, and we're going to go into it in a sec. But it's about the director of the OSTP. He's made a comment in a press conference or somewhere the other day, and I want to play another clip first before we go into this clip. And this is a clip from Trump from a couple of weeks ago, and he's talking in the Oval Office about weapons technology.
And we're very powerful. This country is very powerful. Let me tell you, it's far more powerful than people understand. We have weaponry that nobody has any idea what it is, and it is the most powerful weapons in the world that we have. More powerful than anybody, not even close. So nobody's going to do that, but I think that if that's what you're referring to, maybe.
Now, when I first saw that, and a lot of people saw that, X came alive again. Everybody was like, "Oh, what did he just say? What did he mean behind that?"
Right.
And you could sort of brush it off as Trump being Trump and everything like that. But it was an interesting comment that he made. Was he mean we have weapons that nobody else has that you can't even imagine? I can imagine some pretty crazy shit. I'm sure most people watching this, and you guys can, we've all seen Star Trek, Star Wars, Star whatever. I can imagine some pretty crazy shit. So that was a real standout comment. Now we have this guy, director Kratios. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's clearly a Greek surname. And he is the director of the OSTP, former head of DARPA, as well, apparently, which is incredibly interesting. You know, the technology at DARPA is said to be 50 years ahead of anything that we know about. Anyway, this guy is now head of the OSTP. He's speaking at a conference the other day, and we're just going to have a listen to his opening statement here very quickly.
Our passenger planes are slower than they used to be. Our trains crawl compared to those in other parts of the world. Our cars do not fly. Advances have not stopped, but something has gone wrong. Stagnation was a choice. We have weighed down our builders and innovators. The well-intentioned regulatory regime of the 1970s became an ever-tightening ratchet, first hampering America's ability to become a net energy exporter and then making it harder and harder to build. We seem to have lost focus and vision, to have lowered our sights and let systems and structures and bureaucracies muddle us along. But we are capable of so much more. Our technologies permit us to manipulate time and space. They leave distance annihilated, cause things to grow and improve productivity.
That's a very, very interesting statement there. Thank you to at UAP James. I completely stole that video off you.
He's a good guy.
He is a good guy. That comment. I mean, the full transcript is available. It's on the White House website. I'll put a link in the description below for you to read the whole thing. And he does circle back round to it about that at the end of the talk as well. That's just a really standout comment. And Tom and I were talking before the show, and we were trying to figure out what could he have meant by this. Was he referring to something else, or was it a play on words, or whatever? But I'm sorry, I literally cannot think what he meant other than what he said. It's like he said the quiet bit out loud. We have technology that has the ability to manipulate time and space and leave distance annihilated.
As
and then
body
you've got
language.
Trump's comments. It feels like, to me, at the moment, like they're just throwing the truth out there. Like, oh, what do you mean? You didn't already know it? Do you know what I mean? Like, they're not even making a big deal of it. What does everyone think?
I mean, there's a lot to glean from that, because if you look at it also from a psyop point of view, how to send a message across to your enemy to make them think that you have this technology might be as a passing comment that looks like it just slipped out. You know what I mean? That might be a good way to send some sort of disinfo out there. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't true. That doesn't mean that they don't have that capability, right? But it just might be a way of signaling to the enemy, hey, don't try anything right now. We have these amazing weapons, or, we're capable of like shifting space and time and whatnot. So that's one side of it. The other side, could be, this is, we always talk about free energy and zero ZPE, and when is that, like, this would change the world, this would benefit everybody, we'd no longer be hungry and all this stuff. Is that the beginning of that? Is that how that begins? Is by these little subtle statements that are inserted into these speeches so that we're slowly becoming comfortable with the idea, even the insertion of the idea of quantum computers into our everyday vernacular, slowly building a base and laying the groundwork for perhaps this type of disclosure. If you were a giant megalithic corporation and you were sitting on top of this technology, it serves no one's goals to keep it for yourself. So either you're selling it for a lot of money to the military, or eventually, once the military's gone beyond it, you start leaking it out to the public, just like every other technological advancement we've had, right? And make profit off of it. So I think, when we think of like free energy, there's always going to be, it's not completely free. Like there's a lot that goes into it, and we gotta charge you like a monthly subscription, or whatever that's going to look like, and maybe that's it. Maybe there's just like this slow sort of building of, hey, maybe we are going to get some alternative energy options very shortly, very soon. And this is maybe the beginning of that.
God, I hope so. Because, the other thing too is that if you just look at who this guy is, he's not like a fringe thinker or anything. He is someone that sat at the very heart of U.S. science policy. He had direct oversight over emerging technologies that were
largest
developed
budget in
under
American history.
under these defense initiatives. He's DARPA, same agency that gave us stealth, GPS, the internet. So when he specifically says that we have the ability to manipulate time and space, I think we should probably pay attention. I think that, and his body language is really interesting because he says it and then he like does this like wipe, and I'm like,
yeah,
like what does that mean?
My buddy Spidey might be able to like look at that with he analyzes behavioral sciences. And,
I love it.
And looks into stuff like that. So he's got a YouTube channel,
Spidey. I know the one you mean.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we did a video actually looking at whistleblowers' body language a while back, and a lot of insight was gleaned from that, I think, because all it is an indicator of stress, right? But that could be stress because it's true or stress because he's lying, right? It looks the same. But, if we want to talk about hypotheticals, I'm all for it. I think, it's really interesting if we look at what this sort of Tim Taylor guy we hear about in the UFO lore surrounding Chris Bledsoe, and him saying, oh, I was or watch the movie The Adjustment Bureau, and that's kind of what I do. And then you're like, okay, well, these guys are like using these jump rooms to get to places. Are they manipulating time and space? Is this Men in Black stuff? So is that technology already out there? I would have to assume to some degree. If you do believe Bob Lazar, then you have to look at, they do have gravity amplifiers, and he was able to do experiments where they'd put a flickering candle under this gravity amplifier and the candle wouldn't flicker, but the light would still emanate. Or he would, they had a black hole form in the middle of the room and like this small ball, and they would point a laser pointer and it would go around it. Like these really interesting experiments of time dilation. So essentially, if you had the ability to manipulate gravity, obviously you have the same ability to manipulate time. And for me, that's a good enough reason to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
That's like my hot take on that is like, if that's what we're protecting, because as soon as that information leaks, like the idea of splitting an atom, the first thing everyone did was, run to try and making a bomb with it. Right. So I think if you let that leak publicly that, hey, we do have the technology to manipulate gravity, first thing people are going to do is like, well, how can I go back and change, this event? And, or, some other spooky stuff. So, I always think back to that and I'm like, if that is it, if the manipulation of gravity is at the center of all of this, and you look at T. Townsend Brown, you look at like Oppenheimer, you look at all this, weird stuff that was happening around the 50s. If that's at the heart of it, then by all means, keep that behind a gate. Because I don't think that we should have access to that.
If that's what we're dealing with, then and we have those abilities, then mankind really, as a whole, needs to wake up to a new level of responsibility that it has. I feel
we have to change before we can bring it out.
We do. I mean, we do, and there are a lot of people I think that out there that are waking up to our responsibilities in the world and how we should be acting and how we shouldn't be acting. And there are a lot of good people out there, but there are still a lot of crazy, evil sons of bitches out there that would just as soon as rip your face off.
That's just it. There is the dichotomy of being a human, right? Which is like part sort of simian, and we have all these urges, these primal urges, and the other part is this like sensible, loving, empathetic, intelligent being, and we're constantly at battle with this,
Well, even in ourselves,
as long as this side exists, I don't see us really getting to that point before something catastrophic happens. I just think it's unless we all have some mass event, which I hope happens, and we all just like ascend, I think that'd be great.
Who is it?
But
who is it who said that it was the ability to communicate verbally among advanced species out there in the cosmos is actually
It's
very
Whitley
rare.
Strieber.
Yeah, exactly. And I get that, because once you have the ability to communicate and understand somebody's thoughts instantly like that, it would force you to change as a person.
Yeah,
Very, very
100%.
quickly,
Yes. And
right? And
your
because we
internal
have
privacy disappears.
yeah, we have the ability to lie. And when push comes to shove, and if you're in the wrong situation or the wrong place in the wrong time, and you need to lie your way to get yourself out of it, you're going to instinctively do it. So we all battle with this internally every single day.
Yeah.
We have a constant battle of, should I make the right decision, or am I going to make the wrong decision? Am I going to be good in this situation, or no, that person's really pissed me off, they deserve everything they get, kind of attitude, and we all battle with that. So it is scary to think that we do have this ability. And what is scary for me isn't so much that it's hidden. It's scary for me because we don't know who's responsible for these technologies and what motivation they have for developing it, and what's it going to be used for. So I think I
We know
completely
the
agree.
motivation.
Well, yeah,
We don't have to speculate.
no,
you
but
know.
but when you don't know who they are, and you don't know who's got their finger on the pulse or the finger on the button, you don't know what you're dealing with, and who might do what, and what situation it might
Yeah,
lead
like who
us
the
into. It's quite a
gatekeepers
scary
are, like
thought.
really the ones pulling the strings. And you made a good point too. A lot of the anti-gravitic stuff was going on in the early 50s, and it's like that's right after Roswell. So I
Yeah, right
believe
after, I
that.
mean, Roswell, Aztec, Trinity, like all these other White Sands, yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that happened during that time, and it wasn't just nuclear. We were also working on advanced radars and laser technology, and like it was a complete spike in technological advancement, and we've just been doubling up every year ever since. Right? That's the other thing. It's like if you look at the exponential curve of even propulsion and how that exists, right? From fire to coal to gunpowder to nuclear energy, it goes from 1,000 years to 200 years to 50 years to 10 years and now it's just so if we look at that curve,
The Moore's law of it all.
well, maybe we're not a million years behind these guys. Maybe we're more like 50 years
Yeah,
I've thought about that.
behind these guys, and maybe this is a whole three-body problem that we're dealing with right now.
yeah.
Where they're like, well, it's a race because they don't like that we're catching up.
Yeah. Wow.
You know?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. But we've
Yeah.
talked about the three body problem a lot, and I've thought about that. Like maybe there's been leaps in certain areas that they're concerned about. Like it's like they're behind maybe in genetics, but
As they should be.
right, exactly. Oh my God, I like that thought.
But I like the idea of telepathy being the great equalizer, and you look at forces of good fighting the other way, which is like the telepathy tapes and how much that's really expanded a lot of
Yes,
people's awareness
huge.
about this stuff. And so maybe the pursuit here shouldn't be about getting them to acknowledge anything. Maybe the pursuit here shouldn't even be about getting that tech. Maybe the pursuit should be getting everyone to be as telepathic as possible, because as you just said, if we are telepathic like these other species might be, then you can't hide anything anymore. And then people have to be on the same page with everything, right? And there's no more subterfuge, there's no more lying. So maybe the pursuit isn't let's find the UFOs in the hangars. Maybe it's let's practice this perhaps subdued ability that is innate within every human mind. And then once we do that, that kind of raises the collective consciousness that we're all aware of.
I can agree more. In fact, I would go further to say that we do have this innate ability, and that the way that we live our lives and the poisons that are put into us by what we drink, what we eat, and the air we breathe all the time are actually subduing our ability to do that.
Yes.
And I think that's that's another conspiracy
Probably
rabbit
by
hole
design,
to go down,
Big B.
which will save for
Think
another
about
one.
it.
Oh, absolutely.
Would you
It's
want
like-
everyone like this is one of the reasons why I think that they've been so hush hush and dismissive of even their own research that's declassified. It's like if you knew what that would do to the system of our existence, for lack of a better way of saying it, telepathy, like you said, Chris, great equalizer at that point. There goes your control there goes the elitism. There goes that 1%er, mentality where I'm better because I have more money and more access and more this. That disappears. So if you want to
and
maintain
hierarchy
that
in
control,
general.
right, it's gone. So if you want to maintain that type of thing, the last thing you would want to do is have anybody believe that any of that is real. So that's interesting to think about.
And if you want to be proactive, if you're them, right, you would think, how do you actively suppress it?
Right, exactly. Like Digby was saying,
Right.
just, that's
through whether it's through some type of frequency, through public ridicule, or even through genetic alterations.
Right, 100%. That's scary. That's scary to think about. There's so much that's probably happening to us.
I think it's all of the above. I think
Yeah.
all of that stuff happens, and the stuff that they add into our water, the way that TV works. TV programs are called a program for a reason, and
It's
it's
frightening.
because it was to program you, to put suggestion into you. Chris, you're a magician. You know how the power of suggestion works. My wife is a hypnotherapist. It's not that difficult to make somebody think something and to push them in a certain direction. And I think that happens a lot. And, I feel like we're all being sort of gaslit now, in a sense, the way that they're actually just releasing, like that clip there, releasing this information, almost like what you do. Well, it was always there. We always, we've never hidden it. They're sort of playing it down in the way that, something like that, if what he was saying was factual, and I've got no reason to disbelieve him based on his background. That's the sort of stuff that a world leader should be presenting to the world, or Trump or a president or a prime minister somewhere around the world should be announcing, we have this technology, we have this ability. Instead, it's put to some conference that nobody knew was coming up, and somebody had to dig it up to find it, and and it was just spoken as such a matter of fact. And in a way, that's what's happening with these UAP hearings and everything like that aren't really getting picked up by the media, or if they are, they're just sort of like a throwaway comment here or there.
Yeah, it's purposeful.
Yeah.
I mean, even the term UAP, I'm so over it. Let's stop using it. It's so stupid. I was like,
yes,
I'm a UFO fan.
Yeah.
I like the UFO stuff, and that's what it is, man.
We were UA
It's
Pod
flying.
before, and then Digby and I
Yeah.
streamlined everything, and we decided to change everything to just Anomalous, because it really
we were the unidentified
spectrum.
Anomalous podcast, and I got bored of saying it, so it's just like, should we just call ourselves Anomalous? It's easier.
I think that's a good call. I think since 2017, this whole narrative has been shifting towards this CIA-driven optic, version of UFO, which is UAP, NHI, which again, dumb term. Dolphins are NHI, like this. What they're trying to do is they're, obviously trying to control the narrative and put it back into their hands. And I think they did such a good job, ridiculing the UFO world and the aliens and the extraterrestrials, that they kind of shot themselves in the foot. They had to rebrand, but I think it's time for people who are read up on this stuff to exclude them entirely. Why do they get to decide what disclosure is? Disclosure is a personal thing. It'll happen to everyone at different levels of their life. I know people in my life that I could show an actual UFO to, and they wouldn't believe it. Right. So it isn't about a redacted document or scripture or whatever it is. It isn't about that. It's a personal thing. And so for them to try and decide that, like, this is the way that it's going to be, I'm a little contrarian to that. And I think, no, you don't have the right to do that. I think the phenomenon is strange. I think it's weird. I think the weirder it is, probably the more truth is behind it, because if it is alien, then it shouldn't be recognizable. So when you hear about weird hybrid stuff, or you hear about like these weird insect looking things, that could be true. I don't think they're thinking, oh, let's invade their airspace. No, it's probably a super foreign thing that we wouldn't even understand. That's probably at the heart of it. It's high strangeness. And if you look at cases that go back, if you look at the work that John Mack, David Jacobs, and Bud Hopkins all did, dealing with abductees, I mean, it is strange, dude. It is so freaking off the wall bizarre. And there are thousands, tens of thousands of people who've come forward and saying that they've been abducted. And those are only the people that have come forward, right? So with any numbers that huge, and then you look at cattle mutilations, which are happening still. And yet these CIA people who talk about UAPs and NHIs, they don't even talk about this
No.
stuff.
Right. They stay completely away from anything to do with
So
abduction.
how can we take any of that seriously when they're ignoring a large part of the information that's out
a great
there?
point.
You know, and so I look at that and I'm like, sometimes I get caught up. Sometimes I go to the hearing and I have podcasts with people who are on the inside, and they'll spin this whole, formal narrative, and I got to shake my head afterwards and be like, well, hold on a second. There's all this other stuff that's been existing for so long that y'all are just ignoring, that you're not even talking about, dude. You're omitting all of this really important information that is coming from personal testimony, from credible witnesses and sources. And so, when I hear the UAP stuff, the NHI talk, I listen to it, but at a certain point, I got to tune it out and I got to trust my own instincts.
Yeah, and that's only the stuff in living memory as well. Everybody, they all ignore stuff about our ancient past and how much evidence there is about things that have happened all along. Ancient Egyptians, the Sumerian text, the Anunnaki, all these things that are woven throughout our history that lead us to question our own origins. And you can't touch that subject.
Yeah. And not to mention a lot of these people who are in, like, let's say, like the past UAP task force or the new one or ATIP or OSAP or all that. Most of these people don't know that much about the UFO stuff. They don't know that much about ETs, right? They're read in, and they know what they're being presented. But the fact is that, like, I'm sure you people, a lot of people watching this video at this point, after an hour, in, are way more caught up than any of those people who have been elected or appointed these positions. And so for you to sit there and wait for them to give you information is wild, when all that information exists and there's so much of it out there, in these past books and testimonies and documents and witnesses. And so I got to stop myself every now and then from really listening to a lot of that stuff and just feeling like, hold on a second. There's so much more to this than what you're saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, we'll start wrapping up shortly as we're going past the hour mark, but I'll throw a couple more questions your way and Tom can do the same. If you had the ability, which you actually do, to interview anybody, who would you most like to have the opportunity to interview on your show?
I mean, obviously I think Bob Lazar, I think, he's been a person that I've, really looked into the most, I think, out of all of the people, just because his story, it captivated so many people. He might be, in my opinion, the closest I'll ever come to being inside a spaceship. So I think, yeah, but I want to talk to more experiencers who have really interesting stories, and that's something I want to focus on more, because as you go deeper into this topic, and I'm friends with Jesse Michaels, who you guys I'm sure know, and he's amazing, so bright, and this guy's interviewed everybody. He's everybody, save a few people. He's interviewed literally everybody. And like, once you get to that, like, then what, right? You go back and do a second interview, or like, what do you do, right? So I'm already thinking that way, and I'm like, there's so many stories out there that haven't been told, and I just want those people to tell them, whether they're true or not, whether we believe them or not. Let's add something new to the conversation.
I think somebody with your with an audience your size, taking on the mantle of looking into experiences and abductees, I think is something that would be well received by the public, because I have had two, arguably three, abduction experiences. Once when I was living in Morocco last year, once tail end of this year as well, in two separate locations. And it's really important to get this information out so other people can hear it, so that other people that have experiences also feel like they're not alone, so they can speak up. And we're also missing a massive part of the data set. You can't just go around interviewing the same UFO celebrities, and that's what they are, a lot of them now. A lot of ufology now has just turned into it feels like you're watching a movie because somebody is directing this. You know, there are people out there that go, yes, go on this show, yes, say that, yes, don't say this, you know, and it just feels like a movie right now. But we're missing a massive data set, and that is the people that have actually woken up in a room that's not their own, with alien beings standing at the foot of their bed speaking to them telepathically, which is what happened to me. And I had one experience that was just like, I woke up somewhere and I was panicking, and I literally heard in my head, it's okay, don't worry, calm down, we'll send you back. And then I woke up and I was upright in my bed in Morocco. And then the second one, it was a horrible experience. And I woke up in the middle of the night and there was this smaller grey being to my right side, sort of saying, don't worry, calm down. And I was like fighting and screaming. And then I looked to the left of me and there was this being staring me in the face, and which looked basically like it was a mantid being. I saw these big long arms carrying over me, and I looked at it and I could hear its thoughts in my head, and it was basically like, I will fuck you up. I don't give a shit. I do not absolutely give a shit. And I was screaming my absolute head off, and that was horrific.
Whoa.
The other one was absolutely fine. I woke up and I almost felt the next day like oddly calm about it. And I remember talking to Tom, and then I've got these scars on my leg that I still have now, little like drill holes in both my legs, where even to this point today, if I go out in the sun, these scars don't tan because the incisions were so dark that it broke down the melanin in my skin, which means that when the sun hits it, they don't tan. So as soon as I go out in the sun, you can see these circles in my legs. And that one didn't freak me out at all. And this other one that happened at the end of last year, it affected me for days and days and days. And, you know, who do you speak to about stuff like that? You don't. And you only actually heal from those experiences by actually talking about them. And not enough large podcasts out there give enough attention to the people out there who have had the first-hand experience.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I know it's tough to talk about stuff like that. It's so great that you have an audience that can be receptive to that, and that you've cultivated and fostered that type of audience. I think that that's really great. And I think we need more of that. You know, and when it comes to, you know, experiences like that, that's the other tricky part, is not only is it tough for people to come forward, for fear of obviously ridicule from their peers, their employer, or their family, but also I think equally as tough as this ridicule that people are facing is just the fear of putting it out there, just making it real. Right. And I think a lot of people would rather suppress it and hold on to it, because if it's not out there, it's not real. I can explain it away.
Yeah.
But as soon as it's out there and other people are corroborating that information, then it becomes real. And that's very scary. It's very, very scary. It's a very scary thing. And no matter what actually happened is still very real and very scary.
Yeah. And
so, yeah, it's tough. And then from a podcaster who hasn't, you know, been abducted, I don't think, it's tough for me because I don't want to be exploitative, right? And that's something that I want to make that crystal clear. I'm not out here calling abductees and asking them to tell me about their stories. I don't want that. That's not what I want. But if someone, you know, was willing to come forward with their experience, and I feel like it could make for an interesting conversation on my show, then we can work together to make that happen. But that's where I'm sort of struggling, is that I have had people come to me and I still feel reluctant because I will be monetizing this, right? And so there is that reluctancy that I still feel personally.
I get that. Well, Chris,
it's just another person.
I will happily volunteer myself as your guinea pig.
Yeah, if you ever find yourself over in Canada, you're more than welcome.
You know, this last we started a new little segment that I'm going to do each week called Anomalous Transmission. It's just audio only for people that can't like look down at their screens, because I know there's a lot of that. In the very first episode, this is what I was talking about, is that being an experiencer is a blessing and a curse. So the way I approach it, maybe this will help you, Chris, is I only want that type of person to come on if it's what they truly want, and if it's going to do something for them internally. Like, do you need, it's like a venting thing. It's like, do you want to come on and tell this story because you need to get it off your chest? If it's going to serve that type of purpose for you, then that's the best thing that I can do for you. Now, the monetization thing, I've thought about that too. And I've spoken to people in the background where I'm like, if you're not comfortable with me monetizing this episode, then I won't. You know, I'll leave it up to the guest. Honestly, I have no problem with that, because if it's going to help them at the end of the day, then it's worth its weight in gold, because I know what that life is like, because I am one.
Yeah. I appreciate you giving me that advice. I will say that, you know, there is this stigma in ufology, that's a word, about monetization and about making money, right? And
Huge.
yeah, the grifting word. And I do think that that's something to be taken seriously, because I do think that that exists.
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
I also think when people say, you know, money isn't the reason, it doesn't have to be the number one reason, and I think that that's fine. I think if money's not the number one reason, then it's fine. It could be reason number 3 or 4, because everybody has to make money. Everybody has to pay their bills.
Yes. Thank
Right.
you for
So
saying that.
I think it's important that distinction can be made. If it's only money, I think we can spot those people.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And I think over a long, you know, if you watch enough of the stuff that people put out there, you can discern whether you think it's now more about money than ever, or whatever that is. But yeah, I don't want to come on here and say it's not about money. Definitely money is a reason we
It's a
work,
factor.
right? It's a
Yes.
reason that I edit for 50 hours a week, dude. I want to get paid for my time.
Absolutely.
But I am cognizant that, you know, I do not want it to be exploitative of people who've especially people who've gone through something traumatic, especially that. And so, but yeah, there is that's always a question, and that always does come up. And so I feel the need to address it. And I think if more people just addressed it rather than, you know, sit there and oh, it's never about money. Of course it's about money. Of course there's money involved.
Yeah.
You know, that's not the question. It's whether or not money is dictating and if money's the main factor in what it is you're doing.
If it's the driving force behind you making the decisions that you take on a day-to-day basis and the direction that you take your channel, then you've got a problem. But if you go, I'm going to stay true to myself and my message and what I want to do, and that resonates with people, you know, then great. Yeah, absolutely. And everybody deserves to be. I promised I was going to bring a goat on the show today.
He got his haircut. Little jet.
Hilarious.
Sorry, I just got 4 baby goats 2 weeks ago.
They're so cute.
Amazing.
But yeah, you know, yeah, you're absolutely right. And the word grifter is thrown around, you know, and, you know, Tom and I, we haven't done much on the show for the last few weeks. We've had a bit of time off while things have been a bit quiet. But, you know, there have been times when I was pumping out a show every single day. Tom and I were doing one on Sundays. And, you know, that's a lot of time and effort that goes into it. So damn right, people deserve to be compensated. And you're also not asking the people at home to be paying it. They're getting it just by watching, you know. And then if people do want to get added bonus content and they choose to, then they can become a member and they can get that, and they're getting value.
You have to be careful there too. Like, what are you offering? Oh, you're hiding information behind a paywall. It's like, look, man, I work my ass off 40 hours a week at a manual labor job. And it's like, yeah, I want to do this for a living. A, it's a lot more enjoyable. B, I get to be creative. And C, it's easier on my body. It's less, there's a lot of mental that goes into, you know, with the amount of editing. Editing can be grueling sometimes. And it's just like, you're just like ready to go to bed in your keyboard. And I have before, but money is a factor, but it's not the reason I jumped into the space at all. It's because this touched my life, and I like connecting with people, and I want to know, I want to learn. And I also want to inspire people to think outside of the box and be a little bit more critical of the institutions that we live under, and that we can all learn something about ourselves in the midst of it. Money is just part of it, because that's the system that I live in. I don't have a
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, I like I said, I don't think I don't think the grifting thing is as big a problem as people think it is,
Yeah.
because the way that you just stop it from is just stop watching the video, and just
Yes.
that's how you
Yeah,
end
that's
it,
pretty
right?
much it.
It's like it's a pretty easy fix. You don't have to go scream it. You can just say, just stop watching it, just don't support it.
That's it.
If you think that that's what's going on, like it's pretty easy. I was talking to Jesse about that, the other day, because as well, I think like the bigger you get, the more that becomes a question.
Yes.
I've dealt, by the way, like I had a really successful YouTube channel prior, and I've got distracted by the shiny things and the money and everything. So I know what that's like, right? And I come from there, and now I'm like, okay, I'm learned a little bit more in life, and I can make better decisions. But when Jesse and I were talking, Jesse was like, this is no secret, Jesse worked for Peter Thiel.
That's right.
He was making probably a lot of money working for Peter. Probably more money than he would ever make being a YouTuber.
It's true.
And so for him to leave that, and he tells me that all the time. He's like, dude, if it was about money, I wouldn't quit my day job. Like, it makes no sense to make, to fly across the world, hiring teams of cameramen. Like, you know what I mean? His bottom line is so high with the amount of like things he's doing and everywhere. It's like, if he breaks even on a lot of these things, and he's trying to make some. I'll let Jesse talk about that, but he would never. He's like, I don't care, but I want to stick up for him because I think he's doing such a great job.
I agree.
I love
people coming.
He's a smart guy.
People coming after people who are working harder than themselves, and throwing blanket statements while they're sitting at home eating Cheetos. Like, I mean, you just have no idea the amount of work that goes into a lot of this stuff.
Right.
And like you said, it's grueling. It can be emotionally draining, sometimes physically draining, depends on what you're doing. But, if you love it, then it's worth it.
Yeah.
And I do.
Absolutely.
And
I
you're
think
lucky.
I think that's given us a really lovely ending point to today's interview. And
What a great conversation this was. This is honestly, I'm so serious.
Really.
This was one of my favorites ever.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Thanks.
I feel reinvigorated, man. Like you're an inspiration to both Digby and I, but you're a nice guy, and we appreciate that because you seem very real. And sometimes we don't always run into people like that. I don't know, man. I can tell that you are in it for the right reasons, and that makes me happy. Yeah. So we appreciate that.
I appreciate that. I appreciate both of you, and thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome.
It's always fun to talk about this stuff, as with like-minded people and people who are open-minded and who aren't shoving narratives down your throat. So it's fun to speculate.
I'm a Fed, by the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm a reptilian.
Yeah, that's right.
And on that note, Chris, it's been an absolute joy to speak to you, and thank you for coming on Anomalous. And Tom, thank you as well. Take care, everybody,
Loved
and
it.
we'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.